The border territories between human lands and werewolf kingdoms were places of careful neutrality, where neither species ventured without cause and ancient treaties were maintained through mutual avoidance rather than trust. These shadowlands were marked by standing stones carved with warnings in both languages, their messages clear: cross at your own peril and never, under any circumstances, interfere with what belongs to the packs. The forest that divided the territories was ancient and wild, its trees so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy even at midday, and the air carried the weight of old magic and older grudges. It was in this forgotten borderland, where the forest pressed close to a small human settlement, that Melissa Lonepaw had made her home. Her cottage stood alone at the very edge of the tree line, close enough that she could hear the wolves howling on cold nights, far enough that the village elders pretended not to notice her unconventional choice of residence. The cottage was modest but well kept, its walls lined with shelves holding jars of herbs, tinctures and remedies that Melissa had spent years perfecting. She was a healer by trade and by calling, someone who couldn't turn away from suffering whether it walked on 2 legs or 4. Melissa was 28 years old, with long hair the color of honey and eyes that held both warmth and a deep, careful sadness. She had grown up in the settlement, the daughter of a respected family until plague had swept through when she was barely 15. Taking her parents and younger brother within the span of a single terrible week. She had watched helplessly as her mother's breathing grew shallow, as her father's fever climbed beyond what any herb could touch, as her brother's small hand went cold in hers. The healers of the village had tried everything they knew, and it hadn't been enough. Melissa had survived through sheer chance, and the guilt of that survival had shaped every choice she'd made since. In the years that followed, she had thrown herself into learning the healing arts with an intensity that worried those who cared about her. She apprenticed with every healer who would teach her, traveled to distant villages to learn new techniques, and spent countless hours in the forest learning which plants could cure and which could kill. But it was never enough. No matter how much she learned, she couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been able to save them, that if she'd only known more, been better, been faster, her family would still be alive. The village elders had offered her a position as their primary healer 3 years ago, a role of respect and stability. But Melissa had turned it down, choosing instead to build her cottage on the border where she could help anyone who needed it, human or otherwise. Because the truth that she kept hidden from most of the settlement was that Melissa didn't just heal people. Sometimes, when she was gathering herbs in the deep forest, she encountered wolves who had been injured in territorial disputes or caught in hunters' traps. And she couldn't walk away. She would treat their wounds, give them water, and watch from a safe distance as they limped back into the trees. The wolves never attacked her, seeming to understand on some instinctive level that she meant no harm. Some of the village hunters whispered that she was touched by forest magic, that she had some unnatural connection to the beasts. Melissa didn't correct them. It was easier to be thought strange than to explain the compulsion that drove her to save everything she encountered, the need to prove to herself that she could make a difference even if she'd failed when it mattered most. It was on a night when the moon hung full and red in the sky, what the old folk called a blood moon, a time of powerful magic and dangerous omens, that Melissa's carefully balanced world shattered. She had been out gathering moonflower, a rare herb that only bloomed under the full moon and was essential for her strongest healing salves. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual night sounds of crickets and owls conspicuously absent, and Melissa felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something was wrong. The air itself felt heavy with a presence that made her healing senses scream warning. She should have turned back. Every instinct she'd developed from years of walking the border told her to return to her cottage and bolt the door. But then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. A whimper, weak and pained, coming from somewhere deeper in the trees. Melissa hesitated, her basket of herbs clutched tight in her hands, her heart pounding with a fear she couldn't quite name. Then the sound came again, and her healer's instincts overrode her sense of self-preservation. She followed the sound through the undergrowth, pushing aside low-hanging branches, until she emerged into a small clearing bathed in the blood-red light of the moon. What she saw there would haunt her nightmares for weeks to come, though not for the reasons she first expected. In the center of the clearing lay a wolf pup, barely more than a juvenile, its golden fur matted with blood and dirt. But it was the chains that made Melissa's breath catch in her throat, thick silver chains wrapped around the pup's small body, binding its legs and neck, searing into its flesh wherever the metal touched skin. Silver chains meant this was no ordinary wolf. Silver was expensive, difficult to work, and used for only one purpose: containing werewolves. The pup's breathing was labored and shallow, its eyes closed, and Melissa could see the terrible burns where the cursed metal had eaten into its flesh for what must have been days. Melissa stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, her mind racing through everything she knew about werewolf law and territory. Chains like these, silver and clearly magical, meant this pup belonged to someone important. The craftsmanship alone suggested pack royalty. And the fact that someone had gone to this much trouble to chain and abandon a pup meant that taking it would be considered theft of the highest order. If she touched it, if she moved it, she would be breaking treaty law. The packs would have every right to demand her execution. The village would disavow her. Everything she had built here would be destroyed. She should walk away. She should run back to her cottage, bar the door, and pretend she'd never seen anything. Any sane person would make that choice. Any smart person would report this to the pack council and let them handle their own affairs. But Melissa Lonepaw had stopped being sane the day she watched her family die while healers stood helplessly by. And she had never been smart about choosing her own survival over someone else's suffering. She approached the pup slowly, kneeling beside its still form, and placed a trembling hand on its chest. The heartbeat was there, faint and irregular but still fighting. Up close she could see details that made her breath catch. The unusual golden color of its fur, the intricate pattern of darker markings that spiraled across its shoulders and face, markings that in werewolf culture denoted royal bloodlines. This wasn't just any pup. This was someone of tremendous importance, cursed and left to die in a way designed to cause maximum suffering. The silver chains pulsed with a sickly magical energy that made Melissa's healer senses recoil. This wasn't just physical restraint. There was a curse woven into the metal itself. Something designed to keep the pup weak and prevent transformation. Whoever had done this had wanted to make absolutely certain their victim died slowly and in agony. Looking at those burns, at the way the pup's small body trembled even in unconsciousness, Melissa felt her heart crack in a way it hadn't since she was 15 years old watching her brother take his last breath. She made her decision in that moment, knowing it was probably suicidal, knowing it would change everything, unable to do anything else. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the unconscious pup, though she wasn't sure if she was apologizing for what had been done to him or for what she was about to do. "But I'm not leaving you here to die alone." She pulled iron tools from her healer's bag. Iron could safely handle silver without conducting its magic, and began the painstaking process of removing the chains. Each link she broke released a pulse of dark magic that made her skin crawl, and the pup whimpered even in its unconscious state as the cursed metal finally separated from burned flesh. When the last chain fell away, Melissa carefully wrapped the pup in her cloak and lifted it into her arms. It was heavier than it looked, the dense bone and muscle of a werewolf even in juvenile form, but she managed. As she stood, ready to carry her burden home, she caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the clearing, golden eyes watching from the shadows reflecting the red moonlight. Not the pup's eyes but others. Witnesses. The certainty hit her like a blow. She had been seen. Someone knew what she had done. The knowledge should have terrified her, but she was already past the point of rational fear. She turned her back on those watching eyes and began the long walk home, cradling a dying werewolf pup against her chest, completely unaware that she had just stolen the most dangerous and sought-after prize in the northern kingdoms. She had just taken the Alpha King Victor Nightclaw, cursed into helplessness by his enemies and left to die in chains, and in doing so had bound her fate to his in ways that neither of them could possibly escape. Before we dive deeper into Melissa's dangerous choice, I need to know, are you part of the pack? If you're howling along with this story, show your fangs by hitting that like button and subscribing so you never miss when the next full moon rises on this channel. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know where my pack members are scattered across the globe. Are you team Save the Wolf, or team Run Away Fast? Let me know. Now let's see what happens when Melissa brings a dying Alpha King home. The first night Melissa didn't sleep at all. She sat vigil beside the table, changing bandages every few hours, forcing water and broth between the pup's lips whenever it stirred. The fever came as the sun rose, burning through the small body with an intensity that would have killed a normal wolf. Melissa worked in a trance of exhaustion and desperation, packing the wounds with cooling herbs, dripping willow bark tea for the fever, whispering prayers to any gods who might listen to a foolish human who'd condemned herself for compassion. By the second day, something impossible began happening. The wounds that should have taken weeks to heal were closing before her eyes, new pink flesh growing over the silver burns at a rate that defied every law of nature Melissa understood. She found herself checking the bandages every hour, certain she was hallucinating from lack of sleep, but the evidence remained. Whatever this pup was, however the curse had bound him, his body was fighting back with a strength that spoke of powerful bloodlines and ancient magic. It was on the third night, when Melissa's voice was hoarse and her hands shook from exhaustion, that she began singing without thinking. Old healing songs her mother had taught her, lullabies from a childhood that felt like another lifetime. She sang about moonlight and safety, about wounds closing and fevers breaking, her voice cracking on the high notes but continuing because she had nothing left to give but this. The pup's eyes opened for the first time, and Melissa's song died in her throat. They were pure gold, bright and aware in a way that stole her breath. Not the vacant stare of an animal, but the focused, intelligent gaze of someone who understood every word she'd sung. The pup made a sound, not quite a whimper, more like a response, and his eyes, those impossibly human eyes, filled with something that looked heartbreakingly like gratitude. Melissa reached out with a trembling hand and gently stroked the golden fur. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she didn't expect an answer. The pup's eyes held hers for one more moment before sliding closed again, but Melissa had seen enough. This wasn't just a cursed werewolf. This was someone trapped, someone aware and suffering and somehow able to understand her. And that night, when exhaustion finally dragged her into sleep in the chair beside the table, she dreamed for the first time of a man with dark hair and golden eyes, reaching toward her through walls of silver light, his mouth forming words she couldn't quite hear but desperately needed to understand. The dreams came every time Melissa closed her eyes, vivid and inescapable. She would find herself standing in a vast space that felt both infinite and suffocating, surrounded by walls she couldn't see but could feel pressing in from all sides. And there, behind those invisible barriers, was him. He was tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes of molten gold that burned with an intensity that should have frightened her. He wore the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority, every movement radiating controlled power even in his obvious distress. But it was the desperation in those golden eyes that caught her breath, the raw, vulnerable need of someone who had been alone for far too long. He would press his hands against the barrier between them, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear, frustration and something deeper, something that looked like hope, warring across features that were almost painfully handsome. Each time he seemed to get closer, the walls thinning, his voice almost breaking through. And each time Melissa would wake with her heart racing and the pup's golden eyes fixed on her face. By the fifth night, the connection became impossible to deny. Melissa fell asleep in her chair and immediately found herself in that strange space. But this time the man's voice came through in broken fragments. "Please, hear me, not much time." His hand slammed against the barrier hard enough that she felt the vibration in her bones. "The curse needs you, trust." She woke to find the pup standing on the table despite his wounds, his small body trembling with effort, those impossibly intelligent eyes locked on hers with an urgency that transcended species. Understanding crashed over her like ice water. The royal markings, the impossible healing, the intelligence in those eyes, the dreams of a man with the same golden gaze. "You're not just cursed," Melissa whispered, her voice shaking. "You are the man. You're trapped inside this form." The pup made a sound between a whimper and a growl, and somehow she knew it was confirmation. "You're him. You're Victor Nightclaw. You're the Alpha King." The pup's legs gave out and he collapsed onto the table, but not before Melissa saw it. The flash of relief in those golden eyes, the desperate gratitude of someone finally being understood. But beneath that relief was something darker. Fear. Because now that she knew who and what he was, would she still choose to save him? Or would she realize she'd brought the most dangerous predator in the northern kingdoms directly into her home, wounded and vulnerable and completely at her mercy? That night the dreams changed. And the man behind the walls wasn't pleading anymore. He was warning her. Melissa spent the day pacing her cottage like a caged animal, her mind spinning with implications she couldn't quite process. Every time she looked at the pup resting on the table, she saw both the injured creature she'd been nursing and the alpha king whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary throughout the territories. By sunset, her fear had crystallized into something sharper. Anger at being kept in the dark, at being made complicit in something she didn't understand. "No more games," she said, standing over the pup with her arms crossed. "Tonight you're going to tell me everything. The curse, why you were left to die, and why those wolves have been circling my cottage every night thinking I don't notice. I risked everything to save you and I deserve the truth." The pup's golden eyes met hers with what looked like resignation, then something that might have been respect. He dipped his head once in unmistakable agreement. That night, when Melissa fell asleep, the invisible walls were gone. The man stood before her in that vast space, no longer separated, close enough that she could see the silver scars on his wrists where chains had burned for too long. Victor Nightclaw in his true form was devastating, all controlled power and dangerous grace, but it was the exhaustion in his golden eyes that struck her most deeply. "My beta Marcus Bloodmoon orchestrated a coup," he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "He couldn't kill me outright without losing the pack's loyalty, so he had a witch curse me into this form. The silver chains were meant to ensure I died slowly, forgotten, while he consolidated power." He paused, watching her face for signs of fear. "By saving me, you've marked yourself as my ally. Marcus will kill you to eliminate any chance of my return." Melissa absorbed this, her heart pounding. He should be terrified. She should be raging at him for bringing this danger to her door. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered: "How do I break it?" Victor stared at her as if she'd struck him. You still want to help me? Even knowing what I am? What this will cost you?" "I didn't save you just to let you die of politics," Melissa said firmly. "Tell me how to break the curse." For a moment, Victor's carefully maintained control shattered, and something raw and vulnerable crossed his face. "The curse requires genuine human compassion to break. Not duty, not pity, real care from a human heart. Something I never believed existed." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You've already started breaking it just by choosing to save me. But completing it means accepting a soul bond. Our lives, our fates, permanently intertwined." Melissa met his golden eyes without flinching. "Then we'd better survive this together." And in that moment something clicked into place between them. A connection that blazed to life like wildfire, binding them in ways neither fully understood but both felt in their marrow. When Melissa woke, she knew with absolute certainty that Marcus's scouts had stopped circling. They'd found what they were looking for, and now they were coming with everything they had. They came at dawn when the mist still clung to the ground like ghostly fingers. Melissa woke to the pup's low growl, a sound that raised every hair on her arms. Through the cottage window she saw them, 4 massive wolves circling the clearing, their silver-gray fur marking them as Marcus's rogues. Their eyes gleamed with cold intelligence and crueler intent. "We know you're in there, human," one called out, his voice carrying the unnatural resonance of a werewolf forcing human speech. "Give us the pup and we'll make your death quick. Resist and we'll take our time." Melissa's hands shook as she grabbed her herb bag and the small iron knife she used for gathering roots. The pup jumped from the table despite his healing wounds, positioning himself between her and the door. Through their bond, she felt his desperate determination. He would die before letting them touch her. The first rogue hit the door with enough force to crack the frame. Melissa didn't wait for the second impact. She grabbed the pup and bolted through the back window, hitting the ground running as wood splintered behind them. The forest swallowed them in seconds, but she could hear the rogues giving chase, their heavy footfalls closing the distance with terrifying speed. A massive wolf burst from the undergrowth directly in their path. Melissa skidded to a stop, trapped, her knife raised in a grip that wouldn't save her. The rogue lunged, jaws open wide enough to crush her skull. The pup's scream tore through the forest, a sound of such primal rage and anguish that birds exploded from the trees. Golden light erupted from his small body as he threw himself between Melissa and death. For one impossible moment he wasn't a pup anymore. His form stretched and shifted, becoming something larger, more powerful, a glimpse of the Alpha King he truly was. The transformation was incomplete, agonizing, but it was enough. He caught the rogue's throat in jaws that were suddenly too large, too strong, and threw the wolf 20 feet into a tree trunk with a sickening crack. The other rogues fell back, shock and fear warring in their eyes. But the victory lasted only seconds. The golden light flickered and died, and the pup collapsed, blood seeping from his nose and ears, his body convulsing from the strain of forcing a transformation the curse wouldn't allow. No. Melissa dropped beside him, her hands glowing faintly with healing energy she'd never possessed before. Something the bond had awakened in her. She felt his pain through their connection, felt him dying, and realized with horror that every time he tried to protect her, the curse tightened its grip. Their bond gave him strength, but using that strength was killing him faster. The rogues were regrouping, circling closer. She had minutes at most to save them both and nowhere left to run. Melissa didn't remember how she found the den. One moment she was stumbling through the forest with Victor's dying weight in her arms, rogues howling somewhere behind them, and the next she was pushing through a curtain of vines into darkness that smelled of earth and ancient stone. The den was hidden beneath the roots of a massive oak, its entrance invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Some instinct, perhaps the bond itself, had guided her feet. She laid Victor carefully on the soft dirt floor and worked by feel in the darkness, her hands finding his wounds, channeling that strange new healing warmth through their connection. His breathing steadied after what felt like hours, the convulsions finally stopping, and Melissa collapsed beside him, too exhausted even to cry. "I'm sorry." Victor's voice came through the bond, weak but clear. "That transformation. I shouldn't have risked it." "You saved my life," Melissa whispered into the darkness, "and nearly ended my own. Some savior I make." His bitterness cut through the connection like a blade. Through their bond, images began to flow, memories he was too tired to guard anymore. She saw his kingdom, vast and beautiful, pacts that answered to his authority. But she also saw the loneliness, centuries of it, ruling through fear because it was the only language his people understood. She saw Marcus, trusted, respected, the closest thing Victor had to a friend, and the moment of betrayal. Silver chains appearing from nowhere, the curse burning through his veins, golden eyes watching as he was abandoned to die. 300 years, Victor said softly, and I never let anyone close enough to betray me. Except once. That's all it took. Melissa's chest ached with more than physical exhaustion. I know about betrayal, she heard herself saying, words she'd never spoken aloud before. Not like yours, but... And then it poured out. The plague, her family's deaths, the guilt that still woke her in the night. I couldn't save them. I wasn't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough. So now I save everyone else, hoping maybe one day it'll be enough to forgive myself. That's not how forgiveness works, Victor said, and somehow through the bond she felt him reaching for her, the pup's head pressing against her hand in the darkness. I know. Melissa's voice broke. But I don't know how else to live. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken souls sharing warmth in the darkness, healing wounds that had nothing to do with curses or silver chains. When Melissa finally slept, she didn't dream of warnings or danger. She dreamed of golden eyes looking at her not with authority or fear, but with something that felt dangerously like hope. She woke to the pup's sudden growl and the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the den. Marcus had found them. The footsteps faded. Scouts, not Marcus himself, not yet. But they were close, too close, and running out of time. Victor lay still in the darkness of the den, his small body trembling not from pain but from what he was about to say. There's something you need to know, his voice came through the bond, heavy with dread. About breaking the curse. Melissa's hands stilled on his fur. 2 days remained until the full moon deadline. 2 days until the curse either broke or killed him. Tell me. There are 2 ways. Through their connection she felt him gathering courage. The natural way requires the soul bond to complete fully. Your genuine care must become strong enough to shatter the curse from within. But that takes time we may not have. Marcus knows where we are and he's gathering his full force. And the other way? Forbidden magic. Blood sacrifice. I can force the transformation now, tonight, reclaim my full power and end this. His mental voice went flat. But the magic demands balance. To break a curse forged through betrayal and bound with dark intent, something must be severed. The soul bond would be destroyed. And you, He paused and she felt his anguish like physical pain. You would forget everything. Every moment since you found me would be erased. You'd wake up in your cottage with no memory of me, no memory of the danger, completely defenseless when Marcus comes for you. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Melissa's breath caught. So my choices are watch you die in 2 days, or save you and forget you existed while Marcus hunts me down. I won't let him touch you. Once I have my power back, I'll kill him before I even know why he's there. Before I understand what's happening. Melissa's voice hardened. I'd just be another confused human woman dying without knowing what she'd sacrificed. You'd be alive. That's all that matters. To who? She pressed her forehead against his, feeling his warmth, the steady beat of his heart. Victor, I've spent 13 years trying to forgive myself for not being able to save my family. Do you really think I could live with myself if I let you die, or if I saved you and forgot everything we've shared? Forgot that I finally found someone who understands. Melissa. No. Her voice was steady now, certain. We wait. We let the bond complete. And we fight together. You could die. I've been dying slowly for 13 years. At least this way I'll be living first. She felt his shock through their connection, then something deeper. Wonder, gratitude, and a fierce protective love that took her breath away. Then we have 2 days to prepare, Victor said, his voice strengthening. And I promise you when Marcus comes he'll learn what it means to threaten what's mine. The bond between them flared golden and warm, and for the first time since the curse began, Victor felt hope. They came at dusk on the second day when the full moon was just beginning to rise. Marcus Blood Moon led them. A massive silver wolf with eyes like chips of ice and a presence that made the forest itself seem to recoil. 8 rogues flanked him, all seasoned fighters, all loyal to the promise of power he'd made them. Melissa stood at the den entrance, iron knife in one hand, the other glowing faintly with the healing magic the bond had awakened in her. She'd spent 2 days preparing, setting traps with silver-tipped stakes scavenged from Victor's original chains, weaving tripwires through the undergrowth, anything to even the impossible odds. Behind her, Victor waited in pup form, gathering every ounce of strength the bond could give him. This is pointless, human, Marcus called out, his voice carrying unnatural resonance. Give me the pup and I'll grant you a warrior's death. Quick, cling. More mercy than you deserve for interfering. Come and take him, Melissa said, her voice steadier than her hands. The first rogue triggered her trap and went down screaming, silver piercing his shoulder. The second fell to her blade as he charged, iron cutting deep enough to slow but not kill. But there were too many, too fast, too strong. Claws raked across her back and she went down hard, blood soaking through her shirt. A rogue's jaws closed around her arm and she heard bone crack. Through their bond she felt Victor's howl of pure anguish. No. Not her. Marcus materialized above her, massive pole raised to crush her skull. The Alpha King dies watching his savior break. Poetic. Time seemed to slow. Melissa looked up at death and felt no regret, only sadness that she wouldn't see Victor free. Then golden light exploded through the clearing like a second sun, and Victor's roar shook the earth itself. The transformation was violent, magnificent, unstoppable. The pup's small form erupted outward in a cascade of raw power, bones lengthening, muscles rippling into existence, until a fully grown werewolf stood where the pup had been. Victor Nightclaw in his true form was terrifying, 9 feet of lethal grace, fur like living shadow touched with gold, eyes burning with 3 centuries of rage and newly awakened love. You touched what's mine, Victor snarled, and the sheer authority in his voice drove 3 rogues to their knees in instinctive submission. Marcus stumbled back, shock cracking his composure. Impossible. The curse was broken by something you'll never understand. Victor's gaze found Melissa, bleeding but alive, and something in his ancient eyes went soft for just a moment. Love. Then he moved and the forest ran red with the price of betrayal. The battle lasted minutes but felt like hours. Victor moved through Marcus's rogues like death incarnate, all the fury of 300 years of loneliness channeled into devastating precision. When Marcus finally fell, throat torn open by the Alpha King he'd tried to destroy, the forest fell silent except for Victor's ragged breathing. Then he collapsed. Melissa dragged herself to his side, her broken arms screaming protest, her healer's senses screaming worse. the transformation was incomplete, still fighting the curse's lingering magic. His body was tearing itself apart trying to maintain its true form while the dark enchantment tried to drag him back. He was dying and this time there would be no recovery. "No," Melissa whispered, pressing her glowing hands to his chest. "Not after everything. Not now." Through their bond, Victor's voice came weak but adamant. "You've done enough. Let me go knowing you're safe. Shut up and let me work." Tears streamed down her face as she poured her healing energy into him, but it wasn't enough. The curse was too deeply rooted and she was just human, just a healer with barely awakened magic. Unless the ritual came to her like a memory that wasn't hers, knowledge flowing through the bond itself. She could give him what he needed to complete the transformation. Not just her healing magic but her life force itself, the very essence that made her human. It would either save him or kill them both. He didn't hesitate. Golden light erupted between them as Melissa opened herself completely, letting her life force flow into Victor through their bond. She felt herself dimming, felt the edges of consciousness fraying, but she felt him strengthening too. The curse shattered with an audible crack like breaking glass, and Victor's form stabilized, magnificent and whole. The bond blazed between them, no longer fragile but unbreakable, marked permanently into their very souls. The mark of true mates. Victor caught her as she collapsed, his true form cradling her with impossible gentleness. "You foolish, brave, perfect woman. What have you done?" "Saved you," Melissa managed, smiling despite the exhaustion. "That's what I do." "Then let me save you back." His hand covered the mark on her chest where the bond had settled. "My mate. My Luna. My home." 3 weeks later, Melissa stood before the gathered packs of the northern kingdoms, Victor at her side in human form, dark-haired and golden-eyed and looking at her like she'd hung the moon. The crown they placed on her head was woven from silver and moonflowers, and when she accepted it, accepting the role of the first human healer Luna, she finally understood what her mother had tried to teach her all those years ago. Healing wasn't about being strong enough to save everyone. It was about being brave enough to try even when the cost was everything. It was about seeing someone in chains and choosing compassion over fear. It was about finding home not in a place but in the soul of someone who saw you, truly saw you and chose to stay. Victor took her hand, their bond singing between them warm and unbreakable, and Melissa finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was enough exactly as she was. And so ends the tale of the healer who saved an Alpha King and became a Luna herself. But the northern kingdoms hold many more secrets, and the moon still has stories to tell. If you want to know what happens when another soul dares to cross the forbidden boundaries between humans and werewolves, then you need to watch my next video. Because trust me, what's coming will make Victor and Melissa's story look tame. Don't let the next tale slip away like a shadow in the moonlight. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're here when the pack gathers again. Until then, may your choices be brave and your bonds be unbreakable. See you under the next full moon.